step by step, it had us really look at what mattered. And that's the bottom line, what mattered. And if you're willing to live with less in order to have the joy that you want in your life, right? So as we looked at how much money we were spending to stay and live in the Bay Area, and that we would rather live in woods, in forest, in a wilder kind of setting, it was like that just turned our lives around. And right about that same...
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, I'm Ivy Cohn, your host for today's very special Peak Moment. It's a peek behind the scenes here in Lone Bobcat Woods, where Robin and Janaea live, producers of Peak Moment TV.
Hi, Ivy.
Well, hi, Janaea. Looks like you're getting yourself ready for yet another winter.
You bet. Fill up that woodshed, stay warm all winter. I love it.
A lot of work, but definitely worth it.
Yeah, it is. It is. We love it here. Yeah.
And what prompted you two to move up here?
Well, you know, we were living in the city, and what we wanted to do was get back to the wild. Robin was raised in Olympia in a forest, and so that's home for her. And I spent a lot of time outdoors too, so it was like a way to be back at home in a wilder place. Both of our dads had built their houses, and so we were accustomed to being in a milieu where you take care of your place, you know, self-reliant. So that wasn't daunting to us. So we made that cut 20 years ago.
Well, it's quite an operable situation, but how in the world did you ever start getting that foothold here?
Well, when we came, it was raw land. Let me show you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Woo!
Ha! It was raw land, and it had a well, and that was the beginning. So we started with this meadow, and we decided we could have spent 10 years building a house, but we didn't want to. We wanted to be here. So what we did is we brought in a manufactured house, you know, the kind on two halves they roll in. And what we ended up doing was adding a porch in the front so that we could have a covered porch and get the fresh air and so on. Because we wanted a fairly small footprint. This is only about 1,500 square feet. So that made things simpler on that end. And then for power, PG&E said it would take us $38,000 just to bring the line a mile. This is 20 years ago, a mile to here, and then of course bills every month. And about that time we visited somebody who was entirely off-grid, and we said, that's the way to go. So what we did is we sized the system and actually ended up putting in the photovoltaic panels here, 24 of them, which isn't a huge system at all. And so there is no grid. I really want to emphasize, there's no grid. We cannot turn it on and plug in. This is it. This is the Lone Bobcat Woods electric utility.
There you go.
Here.
Goes straight from there
Into the house, into some batteries. And so that's where we get our storage, and that's what we're keeping an eye on. Come see the batteries.
All right. Oh, the battery room.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where it's all stored.
That's right. The electricity comes off the panels, and it comes through this box, which is a charge controller to get it in the right form, the right amounts, to then go into the batteries, which are like industrial golf cart kind of batteries.
Well, they're big.
They are, and they gurgle when they're hot, they're warm. And then the power goes from this is a DC system, up into the inverter. And the inverter changes it to standard household AC, so we're not, you know, the whole house is run just like your house is, just on AC power.
Okay, so compared to your average American home, what is your electrical use?
We use about 10% of the electricity of a standard American house. We use about 3 kilowatt hours a day, and the standard house uses about 30.
That's a big difference.
It is, but you know, we don't feel deprived. I mean, I don't feel like we're cut into our lives in any way that matters to us. Let me show you how we do that.
Okay.
You know, Ivy, I forgot to mention that in the winter, when we have long, long periods where we don't have sun on the panels, a lot of cloudy days, what we have is a backup generator to charge the batteries, so they always stay up at a good, healthy level.
And use it as infrequently as you possibly can.
Of course, as little as possible. But, you know.
But the backup generator actually puts juice into the batteries.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So that we're covered for those gray days. So here, you know, in our welcome to the great room.
Yes, thank you.
This is where you can see a lot of the choices about how we live.
And this is one of them.
Is a critical thing, because this is a super efficient refrigerator, and if you think about it, this baby is running all the time, right? Unless you have an electric kitchen, this is the single appliance that uses the most energy of anything in the house, basically. This is really, really efficient. So what they did is they put the compressors, which create heat, which are normally at the bottom of a refrigerator, and you just have to go through a box you're trying to cool. I mean, it's stupid, right?
Yeah,
so they're up here and the heat goes up.
Yeah,
the other thing they've done is they've made it more boxy, and they've got a lot of insulation in here. Now they took out the fan that runs in your refrigerator part, which means I have to defrost from time to time, and moisture comes out, so there's a little more maintenance. But this uses something like 10% of the electricity of a comparably sized refrigerator.
So this one thing alone has made a huge dent in your use of electricity.
Right. Now another thing that we did is we had the manufactured home folks put in skylights in every room, which meant that daytime we never need to use electric lights to just be in the house, because you've got lighting everywhere. And so that saves a lot of the electricity for lighting. And the other thing, of course, we did is put in compact fluorescence, which everybody's doing now. But 20 years ago, when these bulbs cost $20, we were
way ahead of the game in terms of the bulbs.
But you think about it, you know, we were saving electricity. I mean, they figured that if we were on regular utility power, at 7 years, this would have paid for itself. It's more expensive. And in a way, that's part of the philosophy. Invest at the beginning. I mentioned the $38,000 for the utility. What we actually spent, including the generator, was only $25,000. That's a lot of money, but that's for the wire and the batteries and all the equipment and the generator.
It was a one-time.
And we were ahead of, we were ahead of the game, even back then when there were no tax incentives and so on. So, refrigerator and the skylights and the power. So let me tell you about some of the choices we made, what we do have in the house, what we don't have in the house. Let's just sit and chat here. We learned early on when we thought about how many panels and how big a system to make, is we learned that electricity is the least efficient way to heat things. So we took away the electric frying pan and those sorts of things, and instead are using propane. And so we have a regular standard old washing machine.
Okay.
Right. And what we don't have is a power dryer.
No, you've
because
got a fabulous dryer right here.
We've got, in the winter, this line is our wood-fired, solar-powered clothes dryer in the house. And of course, in the summer, it's outside on the clothesline. So that's one big choice. We don't have a microwave. Microwaves are pretty good, but they still chew up a lot of electricity. So we don't have a microwave. We don't have a dishwasher. These are the dishwashers. Because those are not real necessities for your quality of life. But what we do have, sure, the stereo. We each have computers. Robin's we do all of the Peak Moment production here. And so Robin's edit bay with monitors and computers and hard drives and all kinds of gear.
Not to mention your workspace as well.
Yeah, I mean, she uses, I have a workspace, sewing machine. I do the cell wrapping and the fulfillment for our DVDs and stuff, all are right here. But none of those require a lot of power. See, even a stereo with speakers is small next to some of the appliances that people could choose to have. And I don't miss them. I mean, I think that's the other part is we don't feel like we're deprived because we don't have a dishwasher or the microwave. And so what we learn to do is you learn to go about doing things in a different kind of way. For example, the stove, we do have propane. We do have non-renewables. We use propane to cook on the cook stove. And we use propane on a demand hot water heater. Now, it's not your big tank, because again, it makes no sense
for it to sit
there and
stay
keep
hot.
it heated. I mean, the folks say that's sort of the equivalent of leaving your car on idle in the garage, waiting for the time you're going to go drive. Well, why keep
Not
this
very practical
thing heated? Well, and it wastes energy. It really wastes energy. And our goal was to live with as small an energy and any kind of resource footprint as we could. So I've adapted to using, so we have propane for those two purposes. But the other thing that I do is we use the wood stove for heating. Right, you don't use electricity for heating.
For heating as well as cooking.
Yeah, actually,
in the winter.
Actually, in the winter, my little friend here, the wood stove, which you saw me collecting wood for.
I did.
This heats the whole space. Of course, heats the house. And then I've got my own little system for steaming and heating and cooking. And Robin makes breakfast on here, and I make dinner. And so this is using it for both purposes.
And I would imagine that a lot of people would not think that you could make superb waffles.
Well, you got me on this one.
I couldn't help it.
It was hard to give up the waffle iron. My family had waffles all the time. And so Robin, bless her heart, had a Belgian waffler, which actually works better on the wood stove than it does on a little round on the propane stove, because you've got even heat. Soup is easier here because you've got this even heat. Yeah. And so even though this is not a wood cook stove, which would be a whole other thing, this is a wood stove on which we cook.
Yes.
The other thing that we did to save, I mean, if we're talking about saving all the resources, okay, we don't want to have to burn all the firewood, you know, stack 3 times as much as we need. What we did very early on is we covered all these windows and skylights. I made these warm window curtains. They are made out of, hello, come on. What they are is they're made out of a very, very thick set of fabrics. It's kind of like a quilt. And there's polyester in there, and there's some silvered mylar to keep the moisture out, and the fabric on the outside. When we started using these, we found that we were using like 1/3 as much wood. Now, to be true, we have a lot of windows here because we have the best view in the world.
You have fabulous windows in view. You also have an abundance of wood, but there's no point in using more than is necessary.
Of our time and the chainsaw and so on.
Exactly.
So this is a soft version. I mean, even though these are dual pane windows, I should add that. Yes, they're dual pane windows, and yes, it's 2x6 construction, so it's well insulated. But still, you know what else? It makes it cozy.
Yes.
You know, we close all the curtains, and it makes it just really the nicest place to be.
In the winter, and then in the summer, you can use it in a reverse way.
We do. We do.
To keep the heat out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I will add that we did put in a propane heaters for backups. When we come back after 2 weeks being gone in the winter, it's really nice to just get a little warmth started before we
kind of take the chill off so you can function in here to get everything back up and running.
Right. So there's sort of the little tour of, you know, that's that part of how we live. I want to add actually, about water. Because even though we have a well, and we could pump all the water, I mean, it's a good well, and so on, we decided that uses electricity because the current system we have, you have to get the water into some surface tanks and then bring it up to a pressure tank with another pump. And that uses electricity, which is another resource that we are wanting to conserve. So we found a way to wash our dishes, so we use the minimal amount of water, and we take the rinse water and we use it to flush the toilet.
Perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
And the same idea with the washing machine. I will take the rinse water from the washing machine, and that goes in for bucket water for flushing. The washing machine is the one appliance that uses a lot of electricity, so that's a place where I monitor the sun and stuff a little bit, so that either the sun's on the panels or the generator's going when I wash clothes. It just means you have, some extra load so you can last longer until the next wash. That's it.
Very good. Well, that was a spectacular tour of your place, the homestead. And now we're sitting out here in the middle of Lone Bobcat Woods.
Yeah.
And we've been, doing this for a couple minutes. It's the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Got a good crop. And when we were setting up, I noticed over here that we have what appears to be a bed for a bear.
Yeah, bear comes along and just sort of digs down to the dirt level and just spends a night or a day or sits, and watches other things. They're all over the woods.
Yeah, well, I would be a little nervous about that, but we'll get to that in a minute. What was the defining moment back when, somewhere, that brought you to choose to live in the middle of 160 acres?
We were living in the Bay Area and working in the Bay Area and in the 80s. And I had gotten the notion of being financially independent. I didn't have any way to do that, but it was like that. I really wanted to do that. I didn't want to have to keep working forever. And Robin and I got this cassette course that we took that later became on financial independence. And that became the basis for the book called Your Money or Your Life. It was Joe Dominguez who did this. And step by step, it had us really look at what mattered. And that's the bottom line, what mattered. And if you're willing to live with less in order to have the joy that you want in your life, right? So as we looked at how much money we were spending to stay and live in the Bay Area, and that we would rather live in woods, in forest, in a wilder kind of setting, it was like that just turned our lives around. And right about that same time, this is the end of 1988, I visited friends up here in the Nevada City area and had a friend who was telecommuting back to the Bay Area, but working here.
Oh,
and it was
nice.
like, that was just the key. It was like, it's a beautiful setting. And that's how we could continue working, was telecommuting. So those two keys, so we started looking for land and had it in a half year, and the rest of the story unfolded from there.
So how did you end up finding this? I mean, this obviously had history before you showed up.
Well, sure it did. I mean, we started looking for 5-acre parcels and then 10-acre parcels, and we thought we wanted to be further out. I mean, Robin loves she always dreamed of being in a national forest, living in the middle of a national forest, and so we were looking further away from town. But I wanted to be with sort of my face closer to the community. I didn't want to be way, way out there, but my back to the wilderness. That was my image. So this took some looking. And the parcel that we got was 40 acres. And it was one of four 40-acre parcels, none of which had been built on, but which had been bought for homesteads. And around, I don't know, within a year, Robin had this vision of what it would be like to leave this wild. And in fact, we were kind of reluctant to put a house on it even. I mean, it was, but
big decision.
We did. It was, and yet we wanted to be here. So what we did is brought the manufactured home in, and that's when she had the notion, somewhere around there, the notion of getting the adjacent parcel, which was available, because they would have to drive right by our house. It was like, so we hawked everything we had and borrowed money and bought the parcel next door. And through, I'd call it some miracles, her vision of keeping this wild sort of must have been a force, because another parcel became available, and we borrowed some more money. And then when the fourth became available, these folks were going to build every spring, and they didn't, and they were divorcing. And it was more than we could afford. And we looked to see if the BLM, the land, around us, it ended up, we bought the 4 parcels. This once was. All of those 4 were one piece.
So there's
2 decades or 3 decades ago. So we brought
healing
it,
here.
Kinda, yeah, bringing it back to its wholeness.
Bringing it back to its wholeness.
And along the way, partly to keep that vision of keeping it wild, and what helped us to be able to afford to do that, was we put conservation easements on this land.
Now, what does that mean?
Well, a conservation easement, with every property, there's a bunch of rights that go with it, the right to build, or mineral rights, or water rights, or a lot of other things, or right-of-way for transportation. And so what we did was we chose to give away the right to develop these properties, to turn them into a house, a homestead house. We gave away that right to our local Nevada County Land Trust. And in exchange for that value, which was about half the value of the land, we got a tax write-off to equal that value.
Which at that point really helped you.
It helped enormously.
We sunk everything into getting these 4 parcels.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We were still telecommuting, so we're getting Bay Area salaries, and so that money went towards paying off the parcels, putting on the easements, and being here. So what this means is that this land
is a sanctuary
for the wildlife forever. Yeah. That's the plan.
Yeah. Well, in addition to the mosquitoes that we keep batting around, and the bear that we mentioned that I've never seen, but I've seen a paw print.
Well, the bear came by about a week ago. We were sitting at breakfast on the front porch, and the bear just came walking along, I don't know, 50 feet away.
Wow.
Obviously had to hear us talking.
Yeah.
Didn't even notice, didn't even put his head up. It was like, yeah, And it made us feel so good. It's like, it's taken us 20 years. We've been 20 years here. We have been becoming part of this land, and they know that. It's really exciting.
I live in a small, town nearby, but it's still a town. And I love the quiet out here. However, I have to admit, I would have a little bit of anxiety. I mean, if maybe I had 20 years to get comfortable with the critters, but I would be a little hesitant. You've got a bear, which you call Bear.
Yeah, we
and
decided
Bobcat.
to name them capital letters like we do each other. Why not?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's nice.
we don't know, it's like to honor them that way.
And each of the bird calls that you
We're getting to
have
know,
recognized, and of course then there's squirrels and lizards and snakes and spiders and all that. But the one that really gets me are the owls. When you told me that this is like maybe third generation of owls, that actually you and the owl, I heard you a little while ago, and
we're talking to each other. Yeah, yeah.
Just spectacular.
Well, that's part of the gift of living here. I feel like we're getting naturalized. I get a taste of what the native people who lived here, and we've met people whose tribes have lived on this land. I get a sense of what it must have felt like to know all of their neighbors. I mean, think about it, the bird and the bear and the bobcat are our closest neighbors. I mean, the closest humans are about a mile away. So, and you talk about the quiet. I mean, we don't hear a lot of human noises. Occasionally a plane going over, occasionally a motorcycle far away. That's flycatcher. I just heard, that was flycatcher. And that was the flycatcher whose family, one of the,
There it was again.
Was on the eaves, right by the kitchen one year, and we got to watch the little guys start to grow up and fledge.
Yeah, so over these 20 years of becoming comfortable, the critters have become comfortable with you now.
Yeah.
And that's just really, really beautiful.
It's kind of the dream, if it's a wildlife sanctuary, it's ours as well. It's our sanctuary. Some people do sitting meditation to find that inside quiet. I do living meditation, just being here.
Yeah. Well, it's delightful to be here, even with the mosquitoes.
Sure.
So, other than the 20 years to get used to the critters, what's it like to live in the middle of 160 acres? I mean, how much interface do you have with community? Who is your community?
Well, I think there's kind of two levels. The primary community here outdoors are the natural beings that are already here.
Right, I'm talking about the human community.
But the human community, most of our human community are back, the biggest number of our human community are across the internet. That's, increasingly email and so on is increasingly part of who we are in touch with. But for physical community, folks like yourself and other friends that are in Nevada City, we go to town about once a week, run our errands, and we're not highly social at this point.
Oh, you're pretty focused producing a...
Well, there's this Peak Moment show thing that we do, and that keeps us kind of busy. And keeping up the homestead, as you already saw from the tour.
Oh, yes.
So community is occasional, but it's right back here in Nevada City, Grass Valley area, so it's 6-10 miles away.
Okay.
So it's not really the physical neighbors, although we've gotten to know our neighbors and we know they'd be there for us in a pinch. And I think that's something we'll be building on in the next few years. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, let me just take a quick glance here.
Actually, I have something I wanted to tell you about. The difference between being here and being back in the Bay Area, because that's gotten more extreme for us. In our first years, in our first decade, the 90s, we would telecommute and have to be back in the Bay Area every few weeks. And what I've begun to find then, and even increasingly here in the thousands, 2000s, is like it feels like an assault to be back in the metropolitan areas. It's like we don't have this. When you live there, you build some filters and defenses against
noise
the garbage
pollution.
trucks and the sirens and all the cars and all the ugly signs along the avenues. The big box stores and there's this real assault. And it's like we don't have the defenses against it, and so it feels even more like a barrage than it used to.
I remember years ago going back to Los Angeles, where I had lived for a number of years. I hadn't been there in like 15, a long time, and had to drive across a long section, and I was just, my whole nervous system was just like this because of what you're talking about. And I went, okay, dig back into the memory banks. How did I do this? I turned on the radio, I rolled up the window, I ran the,
Yeah.
just put on some music, I mean, just whatever it took. But I can see where it would be after all these years of this kind of quiet.
It's the first thing everyone says when they visit. Everyone, to a person, says, it is so quiet.
Which is fabulous.
And I think that's part of what we humans are missing with the rush of people and so on. So it's very restorative. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun to be out here in the middle of
The mosquitoes.
the mosquitoes and the woods, and so close to where a bear has bedded down, and to have heard the owls, and all of it has just been delightful. And I know that you have exciting things coming up this summer. Take you out on the road.
Yeah, we're gonna go to those assaultive places, sort of.
Well, you're
yeah.
going to pass through some of them and
That's
spend a
true.
little time, but there will be beautiful, quiet moments.
Absolutely.
Woven in and out of all of that.
Part of what we wanted to do on this trip to the Pacific Northwest is visit more of the urban centers, because I think that people are finding ways to re-immerse themselves where they are in cities, building their gardens and so on. And I think that's part of what becoming native. It's a part of how we have to adapt here in the collapse of many of the structures.
Well, this has just been really fun. Thank you so much for letting me
You're
come.
welcome. And I just heard Owl, and she's saying, "Welcome to be here."
Oh,
To you.
thank you, Owl. And thank you for joining us for this very special Peak Moment conversation. I'm Ivy Cohn, and it has been my pleasure to be here today with Janaea and with Robin, as always, behind the camera. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.